Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to ICCM 2021. Hope you have enjoyed a delicious meal. Now, let me invite the next keynote speaker, Professor A. Parasuraman, to deliver his keynote address. So Professor A. Parasuraman is an emeritus professor and holder of the James W. McLemore Chair in Marketing at the School of Business, University of Miami, United States of America. He is also the chairperson of AIM Parasuraman Center for Service Excellence at Jagdish Sheth School of Management, India. Professor Parasuraman is widely known for his work on ServQual, ESQual, and the Technology Readiness Index. He earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Madras and MBA in marketing from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He then proceeded to the United States, where he gained a doctorate in business administration from Indiana University. He was selected as one of the 10 most influential figures in quality in 1988 by the editorial board of the Quality Review, co-published by the American Quality Foundation and the American Society for Quality Control. He received the Academy of Marketing Sciences Outstanding Marketing Educator Award in 2001 and was designated as a Distinguished Fellow of the Academy in 2004. He has also been named to the Chartered Institute of Marketing's Guru Gallery, which profiles the 50 leading marketing thinkers worldwide. Professor Parasuraman has published over 130 articles in scholarly journals and has served as the editor of the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science from 1997 to 2000 and the Journal of Service Research from 2005 to 2009. He has authored several books, consulted with many companies, and conducted several executive seminars on service quality, customer satisfaction, and the role of technology in service delivery across the globe. Before inviting Professor Parasuraman to deliver his address, I would like to share an experience of ours. We, the Department of Marketing, the staff of the Department of Marketing, had the golden opportunity to meet Professor Parasuraman at a conference held in Kingsbury Hotel in 2017. So he is a very humble, simple, and an example which we had as we had the lively conversation with him in Tamil. So ladies and gentlemen, let us invite our pride, Professor Parasuraman, to deliver his keynote speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Vanakkam, ellarkum, romba vanakkam. So it's my pleasure to be part of your ICCM 2021 conference. The title for my keynote address is the Sustainability Service Quality Framework, Implications for Researchers and Practitioners. And I am particularly pleased because the theme of the conference, ICCM 2021, happens to be issues and challenges related to sustainability. And as many of you know, my own research over the past 4+ decades has focused on quality of service. So in the last couple of years, I've been toying with the idea of somehow linking sustainability to service quality. And I have some thoughts that I will share with you today in that regard. And the forum that your conference affords me to share some of those thoughts with you is extremely pleasing to me. So I'm going to, since I have only about 40 minutes or so, I'm going to be fairly quick with some of the slides. So please bear with me. So let me first start with the sustainability part. A brief overview of sustainability and what is popularly now known as donut economics. And I will say more about this a little bit later. But basically, sustainability is a macro level construct in the sense that usually it relates to countries and populations and people and society and so forth. And in combing through the literature, there aren't any standard definitions of sustainability. But a common theme that cuts across different definitions is that sustainability has to do with conserving resources so that what we enjoy today as societies will also be available for future generations to enjoy, to fulfill their own needs. And the underlying support for this whole notion of sustainability at the societal macro level are actually three interconnected pillars, as they are called. You see them on the picture on the left-hand side here. The three interconnected pillars of sustainability are the environment, society, and the economy. Now, in the business domain, not much work has been done on sustainability. Some recent research is starting to emerge, which is a very, very welcome thing. But within the business domain, some of you may have heard of the so-called triple bottom line. The triple bottom line has to do with profit. Businesses have usually been focused much more on profit than on other things. But now, in addition to profits, businesses are also focused on people who are both the employees and customers, as well as businesses are starting to think more about the planet. So in other words, the idea here is that the three major pillars of the macro level sustainability concept, which are environment, society, and the economy, also have an analogous support system within the business domain in the form of the triple bottom line, the planet, people, profit type of focus that more and more businesses are tending towards. And on the right-hand side of this chart, of course, you cannot read any of this, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. And those are summarized here. The basic point I want to make here is that the SDGs, the 17 SDGs of the United Nations, are actually supported by these three pillars of sustainability. So with that as background about sustainability, I would like to show you a brief video. It's just about a minute and a half that introduces this whole notion of donut economics. So let me stop sharing my screen so that the tech team there can actually show the video, and then I will come back. So tech team, please take over.
In the 20th century, economics lost its purpose and started chasing the false goal of GDP growth. In recent decades, that has pushed many societies into deepening inequality, and it's pushing us all towards ecological collapse. This century calls for a new goal, meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet. In other words, it's time to get into the donut, the sweet spot for humanity. But that's no easy task. Today, billions of people still fall short of their daily needs, from food, housing and energy to healthcare and education. And yet collectively, we've already overshot our pressure on some of Earth's most critical life support systems, driving climate change and the breakdown of biodiversity. What we do to this Earth in the next 50 years will shape the next 10,000. So let's replace that last century goal of endless growth with the goal of thriving in balance. And if we're to have half a chance of getting there, what economic mindset would be fit for the task?
Okay, thank you for playing that. So this whole notion of donut economics has been propagated by a fairly young economist from the UK. Her name is Kate Raworth, and it's a very interesting idea, as you saw in that brief video clip. Basically, let me share my screen again. So basically, the idea is very, very simple and yet complex, but the visual presentation of the idea is very simple. Basically, what Kate Raworth and other economists have been arguing is that for society to survive and thrive in the coming years, it needs to operate in the so-called sweet spot, as the video referred to it. So this is actually the donut. The donut is the green part, and it has two boundaries, as you can see here. At the lower level, you have the social foundation. These are like the minimum requirements in terms of food, health, water, security, education, and so forth, that humanity, societies need to survive properly. So that is kind of like the lower boundary of this donut. But then on the other hand, there is also an ecological ceiling, which is the upper boundary of the donut. And this is where, overconsumption, overintelligence of societies and so forth can lead to things such as climate change, which you're all aware of, ocean acidification, and so on. So the idea here is that society should try and move towards the donut and be within the donut. Not fall below the lower boundary, nor exceed the upper boundary. So this is the basic idea behind the macro level donut economics type of concept. Now, switching from the brief introduction to sustainability, let me also briefly overview a couple of different major frameworks that I've developed over the years. Many of you are aware of the so-called GAPS model of service quality. Along with that, there's also the SERQUAL scale that has been developed to measure quality of service. So I will again briefly touch on these two ideas, and then I will conclude my address by bringing the two sustainability and service quality together in a common framework. So here is a summary version of the so-called GAPS model of service quality. On the left-hand side of this framework, you have the customer's perspective. And basically, the model says that when customers evaluate quality of service, they compare what they receive from a particular company or an organization by way of service with what they believe an excellent company should be able to deliver. And typically there is a gap. There is a gap between what customers expect from excellent companies and what they actually believe that they're receiving from any given company. So that is what is labeled here as gap 5. And my research shows that there are 4 major internal service organizational gaps that in turn contribute to this gap 5. The gaps are all labeled here. The first gap is the market information gap, which, as you can see, is the disconnect between customers' expectations, what customers actually want, and what the organization or the company thinks customers want. The service standards gap, gap 2, is the gap between what the organization understands correctly or incorrectly expectations to be, and what standards or guidelines the company has. The third gap is a service performance gap, which has to do with whatever standards or guidelines that may be in place within an organization, and whether or not the organization's people and systems are able to deliver to the organization's own internal standards. And then the last gap is the internal communication gap that has to do with the gap between what gets promised to customers through external communications, typically through marketing departments, and what actually gets delivered through the organization's operations department, typically. So there are internal disconnects between silos that exist within different organizations. So the basic idea behind the GAPS model is that to truly improve quality of service externally for customers, gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4 internally within the organization needs to be closed so that gap 5 will also close. Now, I don't have time to discuss these gaps in great detail, but let me just spend a couple of minutes to talk about this market information gap, because the market information gap to this day is a major disconnect in many firms. It's a major deficiency in many firms. So to kind of illustrate this gap, let me share with you an experience that I had just a couple of years ago at the Sahara Star Hotel. Some of you might have heard of this hotel. This is a hotel just outside of Mumbai International Airport in India. So I had occasion to stay there. And when I checked into the room, everything was looking very good, as a 4-star, 5-star hotel should look like. But in addition to all of the tangible things that I could notice in the room, one particular gadget that attracted my attention, and I took a picture of this, which you see here, is this control panel. As you can see, there are a number of different buttons that you can push. This is a bedside electronic control panel from which the customer or the guest of the hotel could control all of the different functions in the room. Electronic functions, curtains opening and closing functions, the time functions, the temperature function, the fan, and so on. So a number of different controls are there. Now, my first reaction upon seeing this electronic control panel was, wow, this is really great. I was actually pleasantly surprised to see something like this. But pretty soon I realized that just to understand the different buttons on the control, it was going to take some work. In fact, I had to play with the different buttons to see, which button was controlling what type of function within the room. But being a mechanical engineer in training, I'm kind of enamored by these gadgets. So I spent about 15-20 minutes, and I thought I understood all of the different controls. Then I went out for a series of meetings and came back very late, almost midnight. And then I was getting ready to sleep, got into bed. I thought I could use the electronic control panel to shut off all the lights in the room. So as I started shutting lights off, maybe I was too tired and I wasn't pushing the right buttons. I noticed that I had no clue which button I was pushing or what function was being performed by this so-called sophisticated electronic control panel. Some of the lights I was able to turn off, but there was this bathroom light that I could not get to turn off. I will push one button and suddenly the curtains will start opening. Push another button, suddenly some mood lighting will start coming up. So this was actually getting to be quite irritating to me as a customer. So then I thought, well, let me get out of bed and actually go to the bathroom and switch off the light manually. But the problem is I couldn't find any manual switch. Again, maybe I was too tired, it was hidden somewhere, but I could not find it. The only way I could, at least that's what I thought, only way I could turn off the light in the bathroom was to walk back to the bed and try to do it from the control panel. So everything needs to be controlled from the panel. So I could not do that. So I actually went again to the door and shut the bathroom door, went to the bathroom and shut the bathroom door. And again, some light was coming from the bottom of the door and entering the room. So I resorted to a very, very low tech solution where I took a towel and, placed the towel across the crack at the bottom of the door to block the light. So this is my personal experience with this. Now, why am I sharing this? Now, if you think about this experience, the hotel, with all good intentions, put in this device thinking that this will be a way to delight customers, that customers would actually be blown away by a device like this because they can control everything from the side of the bed. But on the other hand, if you look at customers' expectations, I would argue that most customers probably would not have had an expectation like this, to have a device like this. So there is, at least implied in here, some sort of a disconnect between the customer's expectations and what the company thought those expectations were to this device. And also, if you think about resources needed to put in a feature like this in every hotel room, is going to be a very expensive proposition. I'm sure the hotel spent a lot of resources installing these electronic, bedside control panels. And we can also start talking about sustainability. I would say because of this gap one, there are a lot of resources that are being wasted, in many organizations, trying to sort of wow the customer, trying to blow the customer away with bells and whistles that are not really part of the core expectations of customers. So isn't this a wasteful practice? And if this is a wasteful type of practice, then what does it do to sustainability? So already we can see some links with sustainability. Similarly, from a societal well-being standpoint, if you kind of translate that to individual well-being as a customer, it created a lot of frustration for me. A lot of times, service quality shortfalls that occur because of these internal gaps within companies are very frustrating for customers. So there are some implications for personal well-being, and of course for profitability also for companies. I'm kind of relating this to the triple P bottom line. It affects the planet because resources are being wasted. It affects people because customers can get frustrated, and it also affects profits because it takes away from the bottom line, so to speak, of a company's profits, because these are expensive propositions. So building on that idea, this picture sort of visually captures the notion that if you look at the left-hand side, it's a condensed version of the gaps model. So we have gap 5 at the middle and gaps 1, 2, 3, and 4 that contribute to gap 5. So within an individual organization, if there are these different gaps present, then that will have a negative impact on the triple bottom line. So on the right-hand side, you have the triple bottom line, the people, profit, and planet. They are all interconnected. So the internal service gaps will adversely affect at least one of the P's, and which will ultimately affect the other P's as well, because the 3 P's are interconnected. Okay, next, a few words about this cirque-wall methodology, or the cirque-wall approach for measuring gap 5. Cirque-wall is a measure of the external gap, service quality gap experienced by customers. And again, as many of you know, cirque-wall consists of 5 dimensions: reliability, responsiveness, assurance, empathy, and tangibles. And one of the key findings that I've consistently found in my research on quality of service using the cirque-wall methodology is that reliability which has to do with consistently delivering the promised or expected service accurately and dependably, is the most critical dimension. In fact, when we ask customers to allocate a total of 100 points across the 5 dimensions in terms of the relative importance of the 5 dimensions, we typically get about 1/3 of the allocation. 1/3 of the allocation goes to reliability, and the rest are spread among the other 4 dimensions. And ironically, the least allocation goes to tangibles. This doesn't mean that tangibles are unimportant. It just means that in many companies, there may be a lopsided focus on visible, tangible things at the expense of some of these more important dimensions. Again, going back to my Sahara Star Hotel experience, I would say that the visual aspects of my hotel experience were very, very good, extremely good. But I had problems with respect to these other less visible, less tangible types of dimensions. So here again, we are seeing that even today, many companies are probably not using the limited resources that they have in a wise or in an optimal fashion, which of course has implications for sustainability. A related concept that relates to this cirque-wall approach is that we have done a lot of additional research on this whole notion of customers' expectations, because customers' expectations are really the standards against which service quality gets judged by the customers, against which customers actually measure their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the service. And one of the key findings of this additional research that we have done on customer expectations is that when we talk about customer expectations, they don't always exist at the highest possible level, contrary to what many companies think. Customers are quite reasonable, at least that's what our research shows, and their expectations actually span a range going from an upper boundary, which you are calling desired service. Desired service is the level of service that customers believe can and should be delivered by an excellent company. And then at the lower boundary, we have what we are labeling as adequate service, which is the minimum level of service that customers are willing to accept. So this whole notion of zone of tolerance says that companies really don't have to jump through hoops and provide all kinds of bells and whistles to create a good customer service impression on customers. As long as the actual delivered service falls somewhere within the zone of tolerance, most customers are likely to be satisfied. Now, this again has implications for sustainability. Do we always have to go overboard to please customers? What this suggests is that you don't necessarily have to do that. All you have to do is make sure that you fall somewhere within the zone. And building on that idea, let's move on to the next slide, where on the left-hand side, we have the zone of tolerance, and the right-hand side, the blue box denotes the range of satisfaction that customers are likely to get. And and then the horizontal double-headed arrow here refers to the perceived performance level. The perceived performance level refers to the customer's own assessment of the level of service that they are receiving. So as you can see, as long as the perceived performance level is within the zone of tolerance, the customer satisfaction is also going to be within the zone of acceptability, so to speak, satisfaction, acceptability for the customer. If the perceived performance level falls below the lower boundary of the zone of tolerance, then customers are going to be disgusted. If the perceived performance level falls above the zone of tolerance, then customers are likely to be delighted. And in fact, many companies are trying to delight customers these days. Customer delight is an often mentioned concept in many companies. Now you can already see that the zone of tolerance has some parallels to the donut that we talked about with respect to the macro level sustainability aspects that we saw earlier in my talk. I should also mention that there is some literature on how companies can actually effectively manage expectations and exceed expectations. Again, I don't have time to discuss them in detail, but very briefly, managing expectations has to do with keeping customers' expectations under control, keeping customers' expectations within the zone of tolerance. So if the expectations are controlled, then they are much easier to satisfy than if the expectations go out of control. So what are some of the things that companies can do to prevent customer expectations from rising too much? One is to be reliable. Do the things that you asked that you said you would do, and do it reliably. Place a premium on reliability. So if you don't make mistakes, then customers' expectations aren't likely to go up. So if you constantly make mistakes, don't do what you promise, which is the second box here, ensure that your promises reflect reality. Don't overpromise is really what we are saying. And then the third component here is communicate with customers, stay in touch with customers, explain what's going on, and so on. So all of these three strategies that you see here on the top part of the diagram relate to managing customer expectations, keeping that zone of tolerance, expectations within that zone of tolerance, and actually expanding the zone of tolerance. Because if the zone of tolerance is expanded, then you have more room to try and satisfy customers, right? And then once you manage expectations, there's also a lot of discussion in the literature, including in this book, that talks about exceeding expectations. Now, in terms of what we've already talked about with respect to sustainability, I would argue today that we really need to rethink to what extent do we really need to delight customers? Do we really need to delight customers all the time? Do we really need to exceed the desired level of service all the time? One of the problems there, particularly from a sustainability perspective, is that delighting customers and exceeding expectations all the time is not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be sustainable because, again, one simple argument that could be made is that once you use certain things like bells and whistles to delight customers, then over a period of time, those bells and whistles actually become minimum expectations. So how long are you going to be able to continue to provide those kinds of delightful experiences? Anyway, what I'm saying here is that the strategy and tactics for exceeding expectations, that is delighting customers, need to be re-examined in light of these sustainability concerns. In fact, here I would like to just quickly refer to one article that was just published that has to do with customer delight, actually. And one of the key arguments that myself and my co-authors are making in this article is that there are multiple pathways for delighting customers. You don't always have to provide fancy gadgets or really out of this world type of experiences to satisfy to delight customers. Customer delight is a much broader concept than always wowing the customer with bells and whistles. Even sometimes doing the simple things consistently, correctly, can actually be delightful experience, can actually be a very pleasant experience for customers. So anyway, so if you're interested in this, you can look up this article. It was published just a couple of months ago in the Journal of Service Management. So let me now move on to a more closer linkage between the so-called donut economics and the zone of tolerance notion that we talked about. So as we saw, the zone of tolerance is a range of customers' expectations bounded by the desired service level at the top and the adequate service level at the bottom. So if you superimpose that with the cirque wall approach, so analogous to the donut type of idea, I've created this notion of pentagons. You know, you can call this a pentagon, right? It's a five-sided figure. You have the five dimensions of quality of service, and each of those dimensions have a certain zone of tolerance. So this is just a visual way of representing the zone of tolerance in a visual mode, in this pentagon type of mode that is analogous to the donut, the circular donut concept in the sustainability domain that we saw earlier. So moving on to the last part of my talk, let's now try and see in a more formal sense the linkage between donut economics and cirque wall and the gaps model. This is what I'm calling the sustainability service quality framework. So on the left-hand side, just focus. If you focus on the left-hand side, as we said at the outset, we are looking at a macro level analysis of sustainability at the societal and planetary level. So here we have the donut. Interestingly, if you look at the donut carefully, I mean, this is just a abstract picture of the donut, but there's a lot of literature on donut economics. So if you look at the more detailed pictures, you'll see that virtually all of the SDGs and the attributes related to SDGs are captured in that donut. If you move from the macro level sustainability perspective to the micro level company customer perspective, then the analogous concept here is this zone of tolerance pentagon. So you have a donut here, you have a pentagon here, and the key aspects of the pentagon are actually the gap 5 and the 4 internal gaps that contribute to it. As long as you have those 4 internal gaps, you have an external gap, as we saw earlier, and then external gap can occur on one or more of these 5 cirque wall dimensions. So, let me move on. These are the last couple of slides that I have. Let me move on to some thoughts on possible research directions that academics can pursue, and also practitioners should be thinking about some of these issues and questions as well. Researchers and practitioners need to address issues such as the following. Should a company exceed the desired level, the outer boundary of the zone of tolerance? In other words, is there even any benefit to invest resources and invest human capital and so on to exceed the desired service level? The preliminary work that I've done in the whole area of customer delight, which are mentioned in that article that I referred to a couple of slides back, suggests that not necessarily so. There are multiple pathways to delighting customers, so you don't necessarily have to do that. But anyway, more research needs to be done on that. Should we delight? And if so, how? Which is question number 2. If we should delight customers, under what conditions and for which dimensions should we do it? So that again is a research issue that needs to be think about, that companies need to think about. For example, the Sahara Star example, they were trying to delight the customer on the tangible aspects mostly, but with this electronic control panel that visually is very appealing because it kind of connects all of the different gadgets, all of the different controls into one nice bedside control panel. So it's very fancy looking, but in terms of being able to operate it properly and the customer frustration if they are not able to operate it properly, is not very good from a customer well-being standpoint, from a customer satisfaction standpoint. So there are a lot of inefficiencies, I should say, in many companies when it comes to delighting customers today. What are the effective ways for lowering the desired service level? For example, we saw on the previous slide, a couple of slides ago, some strategies for managing expectations. Part of managing expectations is to see if the desired service level can be lowered. If the desired service level can be lowered, and simultaneously, if you also lower the minimum expectations, then you are expanding the zone of tolerance, and you're also making your strategies and tactics to exceed customer expectations or falling within the zone a little less difficult, easier. So there's more work that needs to be done. Are there potential downsides to lowering the desired service level? Again, that's something that needs to be discussed, researched and discussed. Researchers and practitioners should also look at possibly modifying the zone of tolerance for each dimension, taking into account the dimension's importance as well as sustainability concerns. For example, here we are seeing the same pentagon, but if you notice, the zone of tolerance, at least visually here, for the different dimensions. First of all, the different dimensions are here shown by color-coded here. Reliability is this green one, purple one is responsiveness, the blue one is tangibles, this is empathy, and this is assurance, right? So pictorially, I'm trying to show here, for example, reliability, which is the most important dimension. Reliability, which is the most important dimension, should necessarily have a narrower zone of tolerance. There's not much room for error because customers really want companies to be reliable. But on the other hand, one can anticipate that in the customer's perspective, in the customer's mind, the zone of tolerance for tangibles is likely to be much wider because that's not as critical a dimension. So the point I'm trying to make here is that what are some ways in which companies can judiciously alter the zone of tolerance through their communication strategies and other strategies so as to use their limited resources much more efficiently? Can service quality be improved without necessarily increasing the resources needed to do so? My answer is a rhetorical question. My answer is yes. For example, in the Sahara Star Hotel example case, I would say, instead of investing a lot of resources into putting in this sophisticated control panel, why don't you use those resources to train your employees better? Why don't you use those resources to have systems in place to help employees provide better service, better training, and better resources for frontline staff, for example? So you can reallocate resources and improve the overall customer experience without always having to add resources. What sustainability-related benefits can be obtained by closing the 4 internal gaps and in the gaps model of service quality? So here, the question I'm posing here is that what are more formal ways in which we can connect some of the service quality concepts to the more general sustainability concepts? In other words, I'm saying that, specifically focusing on the SDGs, I think researchers have a golden opportunity here to look at in what ways can the SDGs be enhanced, or achievement of SDGs can be helped by focusing more on quality of service that customers in particular and people in general receive from different organizations. So with that, let me stop and thank you for your patience. I think I've just about used up my 40 minutes for this talk. So I will stop here and let the organizers take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful keynote speech on service quality and its models and how it related to sustainability development, micro and macro level. Thank you very much, sir.
You're most welcome.
The next event is the keynote speech by Professor Gary Dessler. For that, let me invite Tasika Yoheshwaran, lecturer, Department of Human Resource Management, to introduce Professor Gary Dessler.